January 1935. 5 months after securing power, Germany's Führer spent most of his time at the Berghof, his Alpine headquarters, hidden in the Bavarian mountains. An avid fan of Hollywood, Adolf Hitler relaxed by spending his evenings watching westerns.
He's fascinated with the battles on the frontier between the American settlers who come in and then push westward to drive out the Indians.
Which he sees as a process of the unfolding of racial superiority. This indicates that the white race are superior to the Native Americans.
He wants to escape, naturally, into this dream world.
Dreams of conquest, a celluloid fantasy for some, but for Hitler, a terrifying reality. Hitler. Who was the man behind the monster?
There were just so many parts of this story that didn't add up.
Teenage loner turned national hero.
He was the Messiah for the German people.
How was he able to achieve it?
All of it was an act. All of it was a show.
This is the definitive guide to the most hated man in history. Adolf Hitler saw himself as a savior who could lead Germany from World War I defeat to a global superpower. Between 1935 and 1939, he began his European land grab, and his dream of vengeance against the Jews became a horrifying reality. By February 1935, Adolf Hitler was riding high. His rapid rise to supreme dictator of Germany was complete.
In uns selbst allein liegt die Zukunft des deutschen Volkes.
Millions of German citizens saw him as a messianic leader.
His image is appearing everywhere. It's on postcards, posters. He's become a demigod. Nazification becomes a cultural process that infects every element of Germans' lives.
Hitler encourages his propaganda minister to take charge of aspects of life that you would never even imagine. So you see children's books taking up his hatred of racial minorities.
Hitler's personality type is undoubtedly that of a narcissist. He needs to be loved. He needs to have this adulation.
But there was a bigger purpose than just feeding Hitler's ego. Gaining public support was the first step in his plan to restore Germany to greatness. Hitler's priority was to undo the Treaty of Versailles, the peace treaty Germany was forced to sign by the Allies after the First World War.
The Treaty of Versailles was the worst of times for the Germans. They lose territory. Their military is reduced to 100,000 men, a non-existent air force, no heavy artillery, and they're forced to pay a schedule of reparations that will extend into the 1980s.
The first step has got to be to re-establish Germany where it was before the Versailles settlement, build up German armed power, restore the German economy. And once you've done those things, you can then start to think about where your strategy is going to move next.
Hitler's first clear violation of the Treaty of Versailles came on the 10th of March, 1935. Hermann Goering announced the creation of a German air force. the Luftwaffe. A week later, Hitler invited ambassadors from France, Britain, Italy and Poland to a weekend meeting in Berlin.
Hitler makes announcements on a Saturday. It's clear he knows this is a time that the Western democracies will be unable to take any rapid action against him. Their offices are unmanned, their ambassadors are away. It's a perfect way to confuse and disarm opposition.
Hitler told the ambassadors he planned to expand the German army. From 100,000, the number specified by the Treaty of Versailles, to 500,000 men.
Hitler tells them a fait accompli, you know, this is a done deal. Now he just declares it openly. He very much plays on the guilt feeling that Germany has been given a bad deal and we humiliated Germany too much.
The room is still reeling. You know, these diplomats are still scratching their heads, and Hitler seizes his moment and starts telling them that actually the whole idea of rearmament is a preparation for peace and not for war. He's tricking them.
For Hitler, this is a great coup. It's a moment to make a great deal of.
The public were jubilant at Hitler's success in freeing Germany from the Treaty of Versailles. But their joy was tempered by fears of another war. So Hitler put his propaganda machine to work. "17th of March 1935, Heroes' Memorial Day." A year earlier, Hitler had transformed a somber commemoration of the war dead into a patriotic celebration.
The old crown prince, who was part of the previous regime, is there to kind of greet him and to pass on that authority. After all, World War I was the old regime, and so using this event to stage his connection to the old regime and to the military gives him legitimacy in a moment in which that legitimacy is really crucial.
The idea is, of course, to appeal to the average German. We lost the war, but now we are becoming a great power again.
By the end of the celebration, the message was clear. The German eagle had risen again.
Here's somebody who's promised almost the impossible in 1933, restoring German honor, and 2 years later, here he is delivering it.
The next step for Hitler was to make Germany whole again. Under the Treaty of Versailles, German forces were forbidden from entering an area of Western Germany called the Rhineland. It bordered Belgium and France. Hitler was determined to remilitarize it for the fatherland.
Hitler feels very nervous about it. And of course, all his advisors are tentative. Some are for it, some are against it.
On the 7th of March, 1936, Hitler launched his first military operation, moving troops into the Rhineland.
They have orders to retreat if there's any sign of French opposition, and yet the French do not move.
France and Britain kept their distance.
It's about stamping Germany's authority in the center of Europe and making the old foes pay for what they've done.
This is part of making Germany normal again. This is part of giving back Germans some pride. This is a part of making Germans less angry about the result of World War I.
Every success, of course, confirms him that he is absolutely right. And the idea of providence is in all his speeches. He thinks that he has been sent to make Germany a great power again.
Hitler says, "I go with the certainty of a sleepwalker along a path determined for me by Providence." Now, this is classic Hitler messianic talk. It's trying to show the world that he is a man who has a destiny, he has a fate. He's like Jesus or any other religious leader.
Germans saw their Führer as a hero who tore up the Treaty of Versailles and restored national pride. But for Hitler, it was just the beginning. By the summer of 1936, Adolf Hitler was toasting his own success. Reclaiming the Rhineland was just the latest triumph since his rise to Chancellor 3 years earlier. These included building the Autobahn, the world's first motorway network, hosting the Olympics, with Germany topping the leaderboard with 89 medals, and a major redesign of the Berghof, from a modest alpine lodge into a headquarters fit for a world leader.
Hitler needs to change the Berghof for both practical and political reasons. He needs space for servants, he needs space for diplomatic visits. All of these things are necessary at the Berghof, so it has to be expanded. On the other hand, and here he's really thinking strategically, he really wants to start staging himself as someone who is really a presence in the world.
It is a most stunning location, and if you go there today, you will see the same view that Hitler enjoyed from the terrace of his Berghof, this lovely sweep of countryside and impressive mountains and meadows.
As the project began, neighbors quickly learned not to interfere with Hitler's plans.
There's a photographer who complains because his photographic studio has been destroyed to make way for it. And because he complains, he gets sent to Dachau concentration camp for 2 years.
But there was more to the redesign of the Berghof than creating an HQ. Still stung by his rejection from the Viennese Academy of Arts nearly 30 years previously, Hitler longed to be revered as an artistic visionary.
He really is constantly transforming this artistic desire into other elements and channeling that into other parts of his policy and his life.
Hitler hired top interior designer Gerdy Trost. Trost became exceptionally influential in Hitler's inner circle. New research has revealed the extent of her influence on key decisions as the Berghof underwent a revamp.
Gerdy Trost is Hitler's most important cultural advisor.
She really becomes Hitler's sort of right-hand woman, if you will.
She is someone that is helping and enabling the spaces of the Berghof to come together.
She works closely with Hitler as a style counselor, who is with him, leaning over tables, leafing through fabrics, talking in intimate detail about color schemes. She is the person responsible for his tableware, what kind of curtains you would have.
Hitler rarely listened to advisors, but he did listen to Trost.
Sometimes she agrees with him, sometimes she doesn't agree with him.
And he tolerates that from her, perhaps because it's really about a kind of cultural debate and that he admires her as an artist.
She talked him out of decorating the Berghof with Nazi paraphernalia. Instead, she introduced the more down-to-earth look of the German middle class, with an added twist.
The main living space of the Berghof is clearly massive. And in this sense, it has the proportions that are quite distinct from any other typical Bavarian farmhouse you might see. It's clearly meant to impress you, and it's really a perfect place for Hitler to stage his own personality as someone who's the grand master of this particular domain.
And the great hall that he builds with this incredible window that can be rolled down to expose open-air view of the mountains below.
He's set up like a kind of medieval or feudal court.
Henry VIII comes to mind. It's a place where politics happens and pleasure happens and military decisions are made, and it's all about him. And its magnificence is a demonstration of his power.
The final bill for the Berghoff's transformation was £5 million, a third of £1 billion today. The complex included an army barracks for Hitler's bodyguards and luxury homes for his high command. It would continue to expand with a tea house for indulging his passion for cakes, and an intricate system of tunnels and bunkers for safety and escape. August 1936. At the Berghof, Hitler drew up his ambitious 4-year plan.
It's almost the only thing of any significance that Hitler writes himself during the course of the dictatorship. He says the economy and the armed forces has to be prepared in 4 years for war. It's the point at which he decides that it's now time to turn Germany into a kind of superpower.
Hitler launched a charm offensive on foreign leaders to give his 4-year plan a positive spin. Hitler's first target was former Prime Minister David Lloyd George, a man from equally humble origins. The Führer's aim was to deceive him into thinking his 4-year plan would bring stability and peace to Europe.
Lloyd George was the prominent leader of the British Empire in 1919, the Treaty of Versailles, and here he is now coming to see Hitler. It is a very important symbolic moment for Hitler, which he's very happy to exploit.
Hitler softened up Lloyd George before they even met.
He really rolls out the red carpet, gives him a chauffeur-driven Mercedes down a newly built autobahn.
This is a particularly fascinating bit of footage because it's Hitler in his home. But he's acting out the whole situation as if it were a play. And his role is to be the country gentleman, the aristocrat. But he's not comfortable with the role. He's closed off his body language with that arm cross. And he does a little gesture. If you look down here, see how he's holding on, the knuckles are like this? This is unique to Hitler. He does this under tense moments.
But Lloyd George was blind to the warning signs. Hitler spent 3 hours with him over tea and strudel, pitching his 4-year plan as a blueprint for peace.
And Lloyd George is totally hoodwinked. And when he goes back to Britain, he says that Hitler really is the George Washington of Germany. He sells him in these huge terms. It's a complete pack of lies, and Lloyd George has completely bought it.
Having conned Lloyd George, Hitler now had to sell his 4-year plan to the German people. He chose the Nazi Party's annual rally at Nuremberg to announce his plan.
Deshalb, meine Soldaten, seid ihr von der Nation gerufen worden, Wache zu stehen vor unserer Arbeit, Wache zu stehen vor unserem Volk und Wache zu stehen vor unserem Deutschland.
The crowds were spellbound by Hitler's idea of a greater Germany. But the speech skillfully avoided any mention of the violence and bloodshed that lay ahead.
Hitler has no problem lying because he figures he will motivate them this way and get them into the final struggle and thus ultimately prevail.
He's nevertheless aware of the fact that he has these two destinies. He says to Albert Speer, one of his most intimate friends, such as they are, that if I win, succeed, I'll be the greatest man in history. But if I fail, I'll be condemned and despised forever.
January 1937. Less than 5 months after the Nuremberg rally, Adolf Hitler withdrew Germany's signature from the Treaty of Versailles. To him, it was a worthless piece of paper.
Die innere Ordnung wofür die Voraussetzung zum Wiederaufbau des deutschen Heeres und aus beiden zugleich erwuchs die Möglichkeit, jene Fesseln abzustreifen, die wir als tiefstes Schandmal empfanden, das jemals einem Volk aufgetrannt worden war.
The withdrawal of the German signature has very little objective meaning. He's already slashed virtually every clause of the treaty. But it has enormous symbolic and emotional significance to the German people.
It was only the first step in Hitler's foreign policy. He insisted that the German people needed Lebensraum, more living space, to realize their destiny. The plan called for occupying land he believed belonged to Germany. In November, Hitler spelled out his intentions. War.
The generals enjoy rearmament. They enjoy bigger units and shiny new equipment. But they're not particularly enthusiastic about another war with the British and French.
Hitler comes away from the meeting uncertain now about whether the army really is on board. But he doesn't quite know what to do.
Amongst those opposed to Hitler's plans was head of the armed forces, Field Marshal Werner von Blomberg.
This is the point at which Goering becomes very handy.
Hermann Goering, commander of the Luftwaffe, wanted Blomberg's job. Digging for dirt, he discovered Blomberg was hiding a secret.
He really feasts on it, and he gives this file to Hitler.
Field Marshal Blomberg marries a woman who has, shall we say, a bit of a past. When she was 18, she posed for a series of nude pornographic pictures, which found their way into the hands of the police.
Goering informed Hitler that Blomberg's wife was a prostitute and that a Jewish photographer took the photographs.
When Hitler finds out about Frau Blomberg's past, he is absolutely incandescent. This is not the type of woman that Hitler likes consorting with.
It is very embarrassing to Hitler because he and Goering had been witnesses at the wedding.
Blomberg's wife was a potential PR disaster for the Nazi Party.
On his route to power, Hitler has very much tried to prove that the Nazis are a deeply sort of moral party and they're trying to lead Germany towards a path of moral rectitude. And so for the idea that this incredibly senior figure's wife is a registered prostitute, he knows could be absolutely crippling for him.
They still want to be seen as respectable politicians, and inside the officer corps, you can't just marry down. I mean, you can't marry a prostitute. That's a scandal.
It's clear that something has got to be done about this. Von Blomberg has to go.
Hitler confronted Blomberg, who offered to resign. The Führer accepted, sending him into exile with a payoff.
Hitler is never to call on his services again. He is now, simply in Hitler's eyes, a man from the past.
But the very same day, allegations emerged involving another senior army officer.
The commander-in-chief of the army, General Werner von Fritsch, is accused of a gay liaison in a public restroom.
Hitler was aware how the Nazi leadership and the German public would react if the rumor got out.
Fritsch calls the accusations a rotten, stinking lie.
Hitler's obviously completely terrified of there being a double scandal. He can't have this. This is a PR disaster for any politician, frankly.
The von Fritsch allegations are completely false, but Hitler doesn't know that. And so Hitler says, you've got to go too. Now, this produces an extraordinary drama. There's a hiatus now. Who is going to run the army? Who's going to run the armed forces?
Hitler is actually undecisive, and it shows that he doesn't always control events, he actually reacts to events.
Hitler came to a decision. A nationwide radio broadcast announced the vacancy for Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, left by Blomberg, had been filled by the Führer himself. Goering's hopes of the top job were dashed, but he was promoted to Field Marshal.
This is sending out a very clear signal to the army in particular that Hitler is now in ultimate control.
He's the ultimate megalomaniac. There's a hell of a lot of power concentrated in him just as one man.
By early 1938, the state, the military, and the people were all under Adolf Hitler's command. As he plotted Germany's future, Hitler looked to the past for inspiration, to legendary heroes like Napoleon and Bismarck.
It is a certain kind of history. It is tales of the great heroes of the German past, the heroic kings and emperors and conquerors.
Since childhood, Hitler had idolized Frederick the Great, King of Prussia.
Frederick the Great is a great hero of Hitler. In many ways, he thinks he's the re-embodiment of this great hero of the past.
One of Hitler's most treasured possessions is a portrait of Frederick the Great. And he takes this portrait with him everywhere. Even when he goes on the plane, the portrait has its own seat. It almost becomes a person in its own right.
Propaganda chief Joseph Goebbels sold the idea that Hitler was Frederick the Great's natural successor. As a warrior king, he picked up the sword and carved himself an empire. Hitler intended to do the same. First, he planned to give Germany more living space in the land of his birth, Austria. For Hitler, Germans and Austrians shared the same Aryan blood, yet they were divided by a meaningless line on a map.
He thinks it's absolutely bizarre that Austria and Germany are not one. That is his great belief, and it is part of his plan all along to unite Germany and Austria.
12th of February 1938. Austrian leader, Chancellor Kurt von Schuschnigg, arrived at the Berghof for a private meeting. On the table, Austria's independence.
Schuschnigg makes a polite comment about the lovely view or what a fantastic spot the Berghof is.
But Hitler was not in the mood for small talk. His priority was forming a closer union between the two countries.
Hitler instantly snaps at him. Look, yes, it is a lovely view, but you haven't come all the way up here for us just to talk about the weather. Come on, get inside.
Hitler and his ministers demanded Nazi officials be given key government posts in Austria.
Hitler has this animalistic side to him. He can smell fear, and he knows how to play with weak people and how to bully them and scare them and humiliate them.
You can see that this is a starting point of something that remains characteristic throughout Hitler's career, which is an awareness of a kind of theatricality, a kind of Wagnerian dimension, that everything is a performance, that this is, if you like, the unfolding of a drama.
Under the pressure, Schuschnigg yielded and agreed to appoint Seyss Inquart, an Austrian Nazi sympathizer, Minister of the Interior. In an attempt to block growing German influence, Schuschnigg put the issue of Austrian independence to a public vote.
Hitler cannot allow that vote to happen. He's concerned that there might not be majority support, or even if there is majority support amongst the Austrian people, there'll be a hefty minority against it.
A public vote could have destroyed Hitler's chances of legitimately annexing Austria. As an act of intimidation, he ordered German troops to mobilize for an invasion. But the Führer got cold feet and ordered Hermann Göring to bully Schuschnigg into submission. With no European allies supporting him against the Germans, Schuschnigg cancelled the public vote and later resigned as Chancellor. Seyss-Inquart plugged the gap.
He believes in force. It's only force, and it's only standing up and bullying people into something that can succeed.
But Hitler's commanders were not keen on invasion.
They're much more careful. They think that one shouldn't rush into it. One has to do it step by step. But Hitler is the absolute driving force.
Hitler spells it out. Listen, it worked in the Rhineland, and it's going to work now. It's that simple.
12th of March 1938. Under Hitler's orders, German forces rolled into Austria. They faced no resistance.
What follows is one of the most amazing moments in Hitler's career. On the heels of the German army, which is met by and large with flowers and garlands from a joyful Austrian population, comes Adolf Hitler himself riding in his motorcade, riding through the towns of his youth.
The Austrian invasion looked more like a parade honoring the great Führer.
So this, again, lends to Hitler's view of himself as being this messianic figure that can do no wrong, instills him with yet more confidence.
On his return to Berlin, Hitler was hailed as the conquering hero. With Austria now under his control, he was happy to let the public vote on their independence. And the result was a landslide in favor of forming a union with Germany.
This is a great relief for the German population. So he has this great celebration in Berlin. There's a national holiday. Everybody is celebrating this great success Hitler has pulled off again.
Two weeks later, Hitler was still savoring victory and eager to plot his next invasion.
Hitler does have an addictive personality, and of course, once you give one parcel of land to Hitler, he'll want another one, and another one.
Hitler's troops had already marched into Austria and the Rhineland. Next up was Czechoslovakia, a country that contained over 3 million German-speaking inhabitants.
The state of Czechoslovakia, which is formed after the Versailles Treaty, is something he detests.
In spring 1938, eager to test his new armed forces, Hitler ordered preparations for the invasion of Czechoslovakia. But Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain sent an emissary to tell Hitler that Britain and France would oppose an invasion.
Here suddenly is Chamberlain saying, for better or worse, if you do that, there's going to be war. Hitler is so astonished by the revelation that he asks the interpreter to repeat what has been said in case he's misunderstood it.
Hitler attended a crisis meeting in Munich with Italy's Benito Mussolini, French Prime Minister Edouard Daladier, and Chamberlain. At the 13-hour meeting, the Allies, desperate for peace, offered Hitler the Sudetenland.
Chamberlain raises this point about will the Czechs be compensated for their farm animals? Hitler explodes. and says to Chamberlain, "There's no time for these trivialities."
Under pressure from both the major powers and his own advisors, Hitler accepted the Sudetenland. War was averted. Much to his annoyance, Hitler was forced to work with Britain and France.
Hitler believes it's a sign of the decadence of the Western democracies, their willingness to do almost anything to avoid another war with Germany.
In fact, he describes them as worms. You've got this sense from him that he's dealing with people that simply don't have the same willpower, the same determination to grab what they want and fight for it.
With Hitler denied the war he wanted, he lied about his future plans.
Chamberlain returns to Munich, and when he lands back in England, he gets off the plane waving a famous piece of paper that guarantees, quote, peace in our time.
And here is the paper which bears his name upon it as well as mine.
But for Hitler, it's a much more cynical exercise. He goes, "Ha, that scrap of paper is of no significance whatsoever."
Chamberlain's eagerness for peace at any price made Hitler bolder.
Every single time, Hitler pulls off a foreign policy coup, and the foreign powers do not react. Amongst the German people, there is a sense of restored pride. They are happy to see Germany once again respected on the world scene.
It reinforced Hitler's belief in his mission to expand the German realm.
After invading the Sudetenland or getting the Sudetenland, Hitler is just partying and feasting on cakes, and he loves cakes. He loves to relax at a good tea party, so it's very typical of him.
But there was a problem eating away at Hitler. He was being celebrated as the architect of a peace he didn't want.
He knows that when he looks back at history, all the greatest military leaders, forged their greatest victories in battle with the blood of their own men. He wants to make that kind of sense of new mythology of Germany built on the blood and sacrifice of its young men. And that's what Hitler wants.
To Hitler, the German public's relief at the Munich Agreement felt like a betrayal. The country didn't want the war he craved. He had retooled the factories and rebuilt the army, but to fulfill his destiny, Hitler had to incite the people to war. Autumn 1938. Hitler had long wanted to cut out what he believed was a cancer preying on German society.
There's no doubt 1938 marks an increase in the active anti-Semitism of the regime. The Austrian Nazis begin a program of active anti-Semitism, kicking Jews out of businesses and so on, murdering Jews.
"7th of November, the German embassy in Paris. A Polish Jew shot a Nazi official. He died 2 days later from his wounds.
Hitler is told by Goebbels, his propaganda minister, about the murder. This absolutely incenses Hitler.
He sees Jews as being an infection of German racial stock. They drift around, they infiltrate themselves into other countries, and they topple them from the inside.
He understands the world through a kind of history as the struggle of good versus evil, which means the struggle between Aryan and Jew.
Despite his anger against the Jews, Hitler wasn't sure how to react to the murder.
Goebbels, who is really virulent anti-Semitic, lobbies Hitler very, very hard to get something done. Some revenge must take place.
Goebbels' idea is to make this into a nationwide, spontaneous demonstration against the Jews.
Hitler says, yes, let the Jews feel the full force of the German people.
9th of November 1938. Nazis murdered 100 Jews. They beat and raped many more. And for the first time, Hitler's regime sent Jews to concentration camps on a massive scale, based purely on their ethnicity. The event was called Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, because of the windows of Jewish homes, businesses and synagogues shattered during the assault. For Hitler, his dream of vengeance against the Jews was finally being realized. Meanwhile, the Führer ensured he had an alibi.
He attends a swearing-in ceremony for a group of men who are joining the SS.
Hitler is, in many ways, a Teflon Führer. Hitler is able to do atrocious, abominable things, but keep apparently clean hands.
But it was not just about targeting Jews. Anti-Semitism became a tool to radicalize the entire population.
Hitler is trying to make Germans harder, tougher, more vicious. If he can make Germans hate Jews and humiliate Jews, then he can carry them on to the next step.
The Germans are willing to go along with the persecution of the Jews, but they just don't want to see it.
The morning after Kristallnacht, Hitler and Goebbels met at the Osteria Bavaria, the Führer's favorite restaurant in Munich. They mulled over the success of the night's savagery, but something stuck in Hitler's throat.
Hitler is annoyed about the damage that's been caused to various buildings throughout Germany during the course of the night. And they discuss who's going to pay for this damage. And of course the answer is the Jews.
In Hitler's mind, Germany has been colonized by the Jews, and that Kristallnacht marks the beginning of a process of returning it to its rightful owners.
As Hitler's men herded Jews into concentration camps, Kristallnacht provoked an outcry in the international press.
It's largely condemned across the world as an act of barbarism.
This is the point at which Hitler realizes that you can't put this out there because there's going to be a great deal of fallout. It's the point at which anti-Semitism is cranked up, but it's cranked up and shielded from public scrutiny.
Incredibly, it worked. Much of the press was still enamored with the image of Hitler crafted by his own propaganda machine, including British magazine Homes and Gardens, which ran an article portraying Hitler as a great statesman living peacefully in the Bavarian countryside.
The idea that an article in Home and Gardens about Hitler's house comes out at the same time as the pogrom against the Jews, the so-called Kristallnacht, is almost unimaginable to us.
The effect of all of this is to make Hitler essentially sort of tame, a guy you can work with.
Two months after Kristallnacht, Hitler celebrated the 6th anniversary of the Nazis coming to power, an opportunity to take his hatred of the Jews to the next level.
What Hitler wants to do is give the German people an almost spiritual experience, and that's why he has the parades in the dark, because there's mystique to it. There's focus on what Hitler's doing. He has the lights, and what that does is it kind of intoxicates the people. And it's similar to what we see with the Ku Klux Klan, because when they held their meetings, they had fire. They had uniforms, they had flags, they had the same mythology that we see that Hitler is propagating here.
The Führer orchestrated a nighttime rally to exploit public feeling. The horrors of Kristallnacht were transformed into an expression of national unity. Hitler chose this moment to go public with his poisonous ideology. For the first time, he used the word destruction in connection with the Jews.
This is the point, really, at which Hitler has linked together the idea of war and the idea of revenge against the Jews.
Hitler's mission was to drive the Jews out of Germany. With a nation now at his command, everything was in place to carry out one of the greatest crimes in history.